All right, show of hands, number of sports fans out there. Sports fans, all right. Now, we can do applause too, we do everything. Now, how many Houston sports fans out there? All right, so y'all have been through it, right? Right, y'all have been through the Houston heartbreak. I'm a Texas sports fan. I'm a Houston sports fan. I've been a fan for over 40 years of our teams. But sometimes we end up, and we've been on the wrong end. We've been on it shouldn't have ended like this end of sports, haven't we? And some of y'all, if you're Dallas fans or Philadelphia or wherever, if you're a sports fan and you really follow a team, then you have ended up on it shouldn't have ended like this, right? The home run chance, the last bat to send yourself to the playoffs, and you end up, striking out, or the last minute shot that was supposed to be made that didn't. And all the hopes and dreams you have had in following whatever team you have for so long are all of a sudden gone. I remember this past October, right? We win the division, or win the division, and we're going to the wild card. And the Astros are going to the wild card and ready to go. Don't break their hearts yet. Go back a slide. I don't want to cause too much pain. And I ordered, when they won, one of the things my dad loves to do was when the Astros won, he would go and stand in line and buy the shirts, right, at wherever, academy or whatever. I couldn't do that. So I went online to Amazon and I ordered a hoodie that said October ready. By the time the hoodie came in, we were well out of the playoffs. We were not October ready. I do hate to bring this up for some of y'all, but some of y'all remember the next one. I heard some groans. For those of y'all who don't know why they were groaning, in this game, the Houston Oilers at that time, was a Houston team, were up by over 30 points to Buffalo at the half for one of the division rounds. I can't, AFC or something, they're moving on if they won. 30 points at the half. Easy, right? I remember listening to this game in the car while we were driving through Galveston, and every time I turned around, it was another touchdown by Buffalo. And eventually, Buffalo came back and won. This has its own name. It's called the comeback or the utter and total failure, if you want to, Houston side. But that. Or some of y'all experienced this past about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. Right? Houston Cougars were on their way, national championship against Florida. And it didn't happen. And I can imagine that in each of these situations, they're sitting in their dugout or on the bench or on the field, and in their minds has this phrase: it wasn't supposed to end like this. Have you had moments in your life like that? I know I have had moments. Sometimes, a contest. I remember going to a state marching contest, and they take 5 finalists, and we were number 6. And so we sat in the stands watching the other bands perform and thinking, it wasn't supposed to end like this. My last church, we had a youth group, and I was thriving and going. Everything going great. 60, 70 kids a night, volunteers, everything going well. But then a pandemic and a pastoral transition. And in that moment, at that time, I'm thinking in my head, it wasn't supposed to end like this. What are those moments for you? Maybe it's planning to go to college and getting everything all set and everything ready to go and everything's good, and then the letter comes and it says, sorry, you didn't make the cut. Maybe that's you had planned your retirement with your loved one, and now you are looking at retirement alone. Maybe that's a job that you had tried and done everything you needed to do, and everything was going great. And when the time comes, you realize that somebody else is in the office that you were planning on moving into. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I think that's kind of how the disciples felt didn't they? It was last week we came here and we celebrated, and we had palm branches. If you missed it, it was beautiful. The kids walking down, palm branches waving, shouts of Hosanna, and it helped us to remember Palm Sunday, which is the week before Easter, which is the time that we celebrate that Jesus came into Jerusalem, and he was welcomed like a king. He was welcomed like a conqueror, the same kind of parade that would have been thrown for a dignitary or a king at the time. And there were palm branches waved, and there were cloaks laid down on the ground for the donkey and the group to go on. And the disciples are all there with them, and it is great. They're waving to the crowd. It's like a ticker tape parade, parade through downtown, same thing. Celebrations, joy, shouts of Hosanna, Hosanna. And then we celebrated on Thursday the Last Supper, which began the period of Jesus being arrested and tried and mocked and crucified. Those shouts of Hosanna turned to shouts of crucify him. And the disciples scattered. And they hid. And I can imagine they too sat there and in wherever they were hiding, and they were thinking, we were supposed to be on top. Jesus was supposed to come and overthrow the Romans. The Jews were supposed to be set free. Everything was supposed to be great. I want to sit at your right and your left, and we're going to be the ones who are ruling, who are on top, who are with the King of the Jews. And I can imagine that they were thinking, it wasn't supposed to end like this. How did it end? I'm going to read John 19:38 through 42. This is right before our scripture today. Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away, and he was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. And Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it in the spices and the strips of linen. This was in accordance with the Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb which no one had ever been laid. And because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. It was over. But then, our story today. Early on the first day of the week, and I'm reading this again because I want you to hear it again. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, like many of us showed up this morning for the sunrise service, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. And her mind automatically goes to what? She came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. Now let me pause there. It is pretty well accepted by most scholars that John is the one who's writing this, and that when he says the one that Jesus loved, he's referring to himself. And I'm sure if Peter ever would have the chance to read this, he'd be like, really? Really? That's what you put? It gets better, by the way. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one who Jesus loved, and said, they've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. It's bad enough Jesus was crucified, right? It's bad enough that he's gone and things aren't turning out, but there she is just trying to do what she is supposed to do. And so she runs back and tells Peter and John, or the disciple, or the other disciple. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter. I'm sure he kind of chuckled a little bit when he put that in. And reached the tomb first. And he bent over and he looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he did not go in. And then Peter comes along behind him. And Peter's always been through Scripture, right? He's always been the one like, do first and ask questions later. Right, all the way through. And so, walking on the water, whatever. And so Peter just barrels on through, and he sees the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head, and the cloth lying in its place, separate from the linen. And finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, again, he put that in there, also went inside and saw him and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. They weren't thinking Jesus had risen from the dead. That's not on their mind. You can tell by the way they look. They go in, they see, they're confused, and then they go back. They're gone. But I think there's some of the things to remember and to pull out from this when you think about Jesus' cloths being laid there. What does it say? It says that they were folded. It says they were neat. It says they were separate. Maybe you remember another resurrection story, Lazarus. When Jesus called Lazarus, when he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." And he saw the strips of linen lying there as well as we went backwards. But Jesus said, "Take off the grave cloths and let him go," right? So Lazarus came out all bound. He was all done. But when they go in, they see this. They see he saw the strips lying there as well as the cloth had been wrapped around his head and was still lying in its place separate from the other. They see this, but they still don't put it together. Something is different. This is even different than Lazarus. You don't see many people rise from the dead, but this is even something. This was deliberate. This was intentional. So Peter went in and saw it and didn't put it together. And they go back. But what about Mary? Mary stands outside of the tomb. We don't know when she got back there. But she stands outside the tomb and she's crying and she weeps and she leans over to look into the tomb. And now there are two angels, one at the head and one at the feet where Jesus' body was. And they ask, "Woman, why are you crying?" And what is her answer? "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." Her mind is still focused on what she thinks that happened. And she turns around and sees Jesus there. Didn't realize it was him. And he asked, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she thought he was the gardener and said, "If you have carried away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." She is still focused on not knowing and thinking that maybe he has been taken away. And then he calls her name. And her eyes open. And she sees who he is. And says, "Mary." And she says, "Teacher." I think this story of Mary and the difference between what Simon and the other disciple that Jesus loved who ran faster discovered versus what Mary saw, I think it has to do with him calling her name. The disciples saw where Jesus had been. They saw the evidence. That's good. But Mary wasn't content, and this story has Mary seeing Jesus. And I think this teaches us a few things, 3 things, about what we can do when we encounter those times in our lives where we say it shouldn't have ended this way. Because we have those, don't we? And I gave you some examples, and you probably have many more. You have some that you are going through right now where you're thinking, this is not what I had planned. But here's what happens. First thing, Mary begins with her own perception. Mary begins with what she can see. She knows that Jesus is gone, and in her mind, all she can think of is it must have been somebody else. It must have been something that maybe I have done. How many times when we enter those times of questioning and wondering what's going on in our lives, do we huddle down and think, It's either my fault or someone else's fault. Or we make our decisions based only on what we can do. On our own strength, on our own abilities. We try to gain knowledge or gain time. If I can just do something better or organize my time better or eat better or take better care of myself. And we all focus on what we can do. And that's what Mary does. I don't know where they have put him. She thinks she's talking to the gardener, and she's acting from her own perception based on what she believed to be true. But in one word, Mary moves from perception to possibility. Because Jesus says, Mary. And she recognizes who he is. The presence of Christ in her life dispelled her perceptions. And when she encountered Jesus, she moved from her own perceptions to the possibility of what Christ can do. Friends, as we are here on Easter Sunday, maybe that's a word for you as well. Maybe you need to recognize and go, Jesus, and move from your own perceptions to what's possible. And what happens when that happens? What does Mary do? Mary couldn't contain the news, but she had to proclaim the news. Mary was the first witness that told other people that Jesus had risen. It wasn't the disciples. It was the one who had encountered Christ. Not just knew about him or saw the evidence of him, but the one who heard his voice and saw him close enough she could have held him. And Jesus sends her back to proclaim the news. She began with her own perception. She moved to the possibility. And in the end, she had to tell others about it. What about you? You either had one of those situations in your life. You will have one of those situations in your life. But my bet is that you know someone in your circle, in your family, in your friends, in your coworkers, or someone sitting next to you, or maybe it's you. In your job, in your family, in the plans that you had, you are sitting there and saying, this isn't how it's supposed to end. Friends, let me tell you, the promise of the resurrection is that when one thing ends, through Christ, something new is born. And that's the hope that Jesus offers you. Happy Easter. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Would you pray with me?